guys, Work here, welcome back to the bench. So today we're going to be doing a Glock project. Now that particular Glock project is going to be the installation of the Ghost trigger set. Now this trigger set includes a 3.5 pound connector and a couple of springs. Now the springs that we're going to be putting in here are a 6 pound trigger spring, a reduced power safety plunger spring, and a reduced power striker spring. We're going to be putting in the 6 pound spring to keep the reliability up slightly. Now you may ask, what am I putting this in? Well, no, it is not my Glock 19. If you take a look at my Instagram, you may already know what's in this thing. This bad boy. That's right, we're putting this in a Glock 40. Now what is the Glock 40, you may ask? Well, it is not a 40 caliber. Wait, technically it is a 40 caliber, but here's the thing, it's not what we think of as a 40 caliber. It's the 40 caliber's big brother, the Mac Daddy 10. That's right, the Glock 40 is a 10mm, 6-inch long barrel Glock. Now it does come with Gen 4 frame and has the MOS style cutout up here, and the reason that we're going to be replacing these components is because it is a stock Glock trigger, and stock Glock triggers kinda suck. So first things first, let's go ahead and get a baseline on this guy. Make sure he's free and clear. Grab my trusty trigger pull gauge here. 6.5 pounds. 6 pounds, and right at 6 pounds. So let's just call that a 6 pound trigger for starters. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to replace the Glock trigger connector and the trigger spring. To do that, first thing we have to do is tear it down. If you need to see that, you can check out my Glock Teardown Tuesday. And for now, we're going to set the slide to the side and focus on the frame. Okay, so now that we've got our lower separated, we're going to go ahead and pull out the firing control mechanism, and we're going to replace a couple of pieces. Now, the pieces are in this back half, but to make them easier to get to, we're going to pull this entire unit out. We're going to grab our block, we're going to sit it here, we're going to grab our punch, we're going to push everything through from the left to the right. So let's start with the front pin up in front. And we're just going to sit those to the side. Let's do the back one next. And finally, we're going to do the trigger pin while wiggling around our slide stop here. Let's go ahead and set that to the side. Now we can get a screwdriver in here. We can pull up slightly on the lock block, set that to the side, and the firing control group will now pop right out. Okay, so now that we've got the firing control group out, let's switch to this side. Now what we need to do is we need to slightly move this trigger bar out of the way a little bit so that we can get to the connector and the spring inside. So what we're going to do is we're going to swing out this way. And as we swing out, we're going to pull the spring a little bit, and that should pop it right out, allowing us access to this disconnector and this spring. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take a flathead screwdriver, we're going to get underneath this connector a little bit, and just pull up, and it should slide up and right out of your block. We're going to go ahead and pull that all the way out. Let's go ahead and open the new one. And that one's going to go in the exact same way. You can see that they are both shaped the same. Now the Ghost connector is considerably more lightweight. It is polished to a fine sheen. Now the stock Glock one isn't bad, but you can tell that the edges are certainly sharper than this Ghost connector. So let's go ahead and get this Ghost connector in. We're just going to sit it right back into the slot and push it all the way down. Next up, we're going to replace this spring in the back. I'm going to grab a pair of pliers to assist with that. So let's just go ahead and grab, actually we may not even need the pliers. If we go ahead and just stretch this around, let's go ahead and use them. It'll make life a little bit easier. So now we've got our trigger portion off. Now let's keep in mind the orientation of this spring. We can see that the rear S is coming up and out this way, and the front is coming out and around this way. So we'll try to orient the new spring in a similar way. Let's go ahead and get this spring out. Okay, right there I just used a nice little punch to get through this little hole back here, getting that spring out. So there that spring is to the side. Let's go ahead and grab our spring set here, and let's take our new spring, which is here, and let's go ahead and put this one in there. So again, we're going to keep the same orientation. Now getting these back in is quite a bit easier. There, that one's in already. And we can take this one and connect it, and then we'll pull, slide our little edge back in there, and our trigger group is back together. Let's go ahead and slide this back into the frame. So let's get our frame back. Let's take our trigger, set the trigger down in first, push the back down inside the frame. We're going to take our lock block, slide the lock block back in, and we'll take our slide release and we'll slide it right in there. Make sure our holes are lined up and we can start putting pins back in. So let's start with the trigger pin. Slide around the magazine release a little bit to make sure that it's captured. Now let's go and place our rear frame pin back in. And I'm just using the punches to line everything back up so that they're about where they should be, flush with the frame. And let's put our front pin back in. And as we put our front pin back in, we will need to reach in and press down on the spring for our slide release. as we press that pin the rest of the way in, pushing it flush, finishing out the bottom side of our work. So now, let's go ahead and put the top back on and find out what our new trigger pull weight is. Not sure how much we actually reduced it there. It still feels like a relatively heavy trigger pull. Let's find out really quick. That was 4 pounds. That one was 5.5. And 5.5. So the 3-pound connector plus that 6-pound spring gave us a 5.5-pound trigger pull. Now, one thing I will say is it is a nicer trigger pull. It's not as gritty as the stock trigger pull was. And I've always felt that reset on the Ghost triggers is better than with the stock triggers. Just a little bit, but I've always felt it's a little bit better. Okay, guys, so now that we got the stuff in the bottom done, let's go ahead and take this thing back apart. Let's put the new springs in the top, and let's see how that affects our eventual trigger pull. So we're going to set the frame to the side this time, take our recoil spring assembly out, take this gigantic barrel out, and here on the slide what we're going to end up doing is we're going to pull this little plastic cup back and in, which should relieve spring tension on our back plate so that we can pull the back plate up and off. Let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so once we got the back plate off, go ahead and pull our punch out, which is going to release the striker assembly. We also have the ejector assembly that we're going to pull out. We're going to press down slightly here on the striker block. It's going to allow the extractor to fall out. And if we pull up here, that safety plunger should come out with the spring on the bottom. So the two things that we're going to end up replacing is this spring on the striker and the spring on the safety plunger here. So first, let's go ahead and replace the spring on this safety plunger. So let's get our new spring. Go ahead and pull the old spring out, and it comes out really easily. Just shove our new spring in there, and actually the new spring doesn't feel like, the new spring's relatively loose in there. So we're going to have to set this to the side together. Just make sure that we keep an eye on that. Now let's replace this spring on the striker. So to replace the spring on the striker, what we're going to end up doing, we're going to take this cup and we're going to put that backwards into the slide. And as we compress our spring now, using the slide, it's going to pull down and it's going to release these two little plastic tabs here. And these are kind of like valve locks on a car. So as we push down, you can see they can come out and our spring will come right off the end. Now we're going to replace that with the 6-pound spring in the kit, which is the shorter spring, and it is just slightly shorter. It is a thicker wire. So we're going to put that back on the striker. We're going to pull that down to compress it. And as we compress that down, we're going to put our locks back onto the striker, pushing them down inside the spring. And as we release the spring, the tension will grab the locks and re-lock the spring onto the striker. So that's it for our new springs. Now let's go ahead and put everything back together. First, we're going to take our striker block plunger. I'm actually going to sit the slide on its side so that I can put this in here without dropping the spring. Okay, so now it's in there with the spring. We're going to take our extractor, big round side facing backwards. We're going to place it into the slot, and once it's in the slot, we can go ahead and push down on our safety pins plunger, push in on the extractor, and that should, okay, with that back in, we're going to go ahead and we'll put the extractor plunger back in. Then we'll go ahead and slide the striker back in. And with the top plate in place, go ahead and grab a bigger punch, and we're going to push down on this big plastic thing, seat that, push down on our extractor. And there we go. The extractor is back in. Okay, so now the slide is all back together, and let's put everything back together and see how it works. Let's get our barrel in, recoil assembly, put that back. First thing, let's do a trigger check. Let's give this a shot. So now we are down to a 4.5-pound trigger brake with a much improved reset. Now it's still got some Glock slop in there, but it is significantly better now than it was before. So that's it, guys. That's how you install the Ghost Trigger Kit along with the striker spring and the safety plunger spring, taking this stock 6-pound Glock trigger down to about 4.5 pounds. Well, that's it for this time, guys. Remember, guys, if you found the video useful, go ahead and like and subscribe down below. Don't forget to share. And remember, I appreciate every one of you, and until next time, do your research, get informed, get to work.